Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Economics Tough Talk podcast. We are your egghead bean counting experts who always figure out the real truth, whether or not the populist left lunatics, well-meaning as they are, like it in their fits of incompetence and malice.
You know, I can't even blame them because in economics, a lot of times there's some really counterintuitive findings that just aren't obvious on the surface. You got to dig a little deeper, look at the numbers and say, okay, rent control. Sure, on the surface of it, people who live in rent-controlled apartments have more stability, they're paying lower rents, but if you dig a little bit deeper underneath that, what's really going on?
Yeah, unintended consequences.
There's a lot of unintended consequences.
The beauty of rent control, it's skin deep, It's like the beautiful cheerleader of housing, but you get to know her and you find out, oh, she's actually quite mean to wait staff.
That's a perfect analogy, yeah.
People would hang a photograph of rent control on their wall as part of a misogynistic attitude.
So, the first thing is that people who advocate for rent control, they're often focused on the renters and what's good for the renters. And they're not focused on the other people in this equation.
Right.
The landlords.
Yeah, often if landlords, whether a big landlord or a small landlord or a very, very teensy tiny small and extremely innocent landlord,
pocket size,
they're often not brought into the conversation about property and housing economics and rents and rent control. And to the degree that they are, they're brought in as a villain, an enemy image. A way for people to externalize their own insecurities around maybe their productivity or other personal things in their life.
Put yourself in their shoes a little bit. You're a landlord. You want a home that you don't live in, and you want the tenant who does live in it to pay your mortgage for you, pay the interest on your mortgage for you, pay the property taxes for you. You get to own the asset.
Maintenance costs.
Pay for maintenance costs, obviously.
And
then a little bit of
money,
extra spending, but you want to make a bit of a profit.
Well, you're a business
on top
person.
Of it,
you're not
right?
Doing this,
It's got to be something in it for you as
well. If they don't have walking around money on top of the asset purchase, on top of the purchases of all the things that you've mentioned.
Yeah.
Why is an investor going to choose to invest there in housing, something we desperately need, when there might be an alternative to invest in weapons technology or surveillance technology?
Right. So are you a villain for that? Are you a villain for wanting a good economic opportunity? I don't think so.
Villains belong in storybooks. In the real world, everyone's fighting their own struggle.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true.
And I think if a lot of these tenant advocates took 10 minutes to get to know these landlords, they would say, raise my rent.
If you're not dehumanizing them, you would see.
Yeah. It's like the they live glasses, except for bureaucracy, red tape, government overreach, and scraping away at profit margins.
The ironic thing, too, about rent control is that, a lot of people who hate landlords see it as chains that only restrict landlords, but actually rent control are chains that restrict tenants as well.
And society as such.
A lot of tenants who live in rent-controlled apartments are like, oh, this apartment is so cheap, I'm going to keep living here. To keep paying this cheap rent, I'm going to choose that because it's better for me to not pay higher rent.
Yeah.
So,
but at what real cost?
They're basically just locked in. They can never move.
They'll miss opportunities to get housing that may be closer to their workplace or maybe closer to amenities they more frequently use.
Or that's in a neighborhood they can actually afford.
Right. And so you have this situation where they're locked in by these low rents. And as a result, rent control kind of tricks them and misguides them and prevents them from moving to higher rent apartments that may be a better fit for them. And in that sense, they're robbed of that freedom because instead, they're paying half the rent they would otherwise pay or whatever sort of fickle, small things they think they're getting in return as they're under the hypnotic gaze.
In a well-functioning market, renters should flow like a river. And rent control is the dam that keeps them festering in a dead. Dams are bad because they prevent flow, and that's just like rent control.
It is, yeah. And the sad thing is, although this is thought to be a way to make things more affordable for people, in many cases, tenants in rent-controlled properties actually could afford to pay more money to their landlord. Kind of goes against the spirit of alleviating inequality, right? Because the purpose of this is to, if you listen to advocates, is to make sure that everyone, regardless of income, pays the highest amount of income that they can afford.
That's what affordable means, and that's what we all should want.
Yeah, and it increases inequality because you have, and now I've got papers that show this, a very famous paper from San Francisco that's often cited mentions this. It actually increases inequality by keeping poor and often minority families in neighborhoods that they would have been displaced from, causing there to be a larger gap between them and the rich newcomers than there would otherwise be if it was all newcomers and they'd been displaced. This is a real thing. For the Occupy Wall Street set, I thought you were trying to decrease economic inequality, not increase it.
Yeah, exactly. Hello, a little bit of logic, please.
Put down the bong for 5 minutes and read some of this housing economics.
Another thing that they don't think about, if it's not profitable for landlords to rent out buildings, they might sell those buildings out of the rental market to people who are going to buy them and then live in them themselves and not rent them out. Where does that leave renters with less supply?
Yeah,
it's horrible.
It's a handout. By definition, it's a handout to homeowners anytime you have a conversion like that. And the rental market getting tightened by that, or if, God forbid, a renter becomes a homeowner, they're losing this sacred status of renter. I mean, the very thing that tenant advocates want to protect.
Right.
You're effectively killing one of them. Like, there's one less tenant to protect.
Yeah.
You killed them. Your policies killed them because now they're a property owner. Now they're your enemy.
What are we going to do next? Help the poor by making them no longer poor anymore?
Who will be left to help? What are you talking about?
The whole point is helping the poor. If they're not poor, you can't help them. It just doesn't make any logical sense. It's economically illiterate.
We are the 98.7% because we brought 0.3% more people into... No, what are you talking about?
Ruining slogans too.
Put down the bong.
In Cambridge, Massachusetts, they actually got rid of rent control that they had for a long time, and studies found that crime decreased in those areas by 16%.
Right. This connects to the inequality piece, is that all of the poor people have been pushed out of the neighborhood, making the crime disappear entirely from the world.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if we just raised rents all around the world and all the poor people were pushed out,
you could bring crime down to zero.
Right down to zero.
So if we just take the rents and we double the rent, we triple the rent, and we just extrapolate on this. This makes a lot of sense. You extrapolate on that, you could bring down murder, assault, you could bring it all down to zero permanently. It's just that the rents aren't high enough.
Exactly. If you're paying cheap rent, you're just sitting there thinking, oh, I don't need to do anything with my life. You light a fire under that ass, you triple, quadruple, quintuple their rent, all of a sudden they're a productive member of society, there's no more crime. Ironically, the way to the utopia that these so-called leftist Occupy people want is through market forces. Do people feel incentivized to build new units in a system where there's controls on the amount of rent that they're going to be able to charge? No, it's not going to pencil out for them. It's not going to meet their pro forma.
Yeah, and I can say, as someone involved heavily in the business community, I know these people. They are like shy little mice that you need to get cheese to come out of their little hole when it comes to building.
Investors, famously mouse-like.
Yeah, and just the housing industry writ large. I mean, everyone needs to get their cut. The banks need to get their cut. Investors need to get their cut. The developers need to get the cut. Their second round of investors need to get their cut, of course, and obviously the second round of mortgage and interest payments need to get their cut. Plus, the landlord at the end of the day needs to say, okay, on top of paying off the asset, what walking around money do I have? And when you add that all up, it becomes a delicate kind of snake charming game where you're charming wave after wave of snakes, while at the same time trying to keep housing, I wouldn't say affordable, but moderately affordable as compared to the extreme.
That's so true. And people never think about all these snakes who are going to be negatively affected by this if you have rent control, if you can't charge what you need. And developers, landlords, banks, the investors, of course. Those investors are the people who risk the most in this situation. They put up all the risk, basically, in terms of monetary value. And investors are people too. Just put yourself in their shoes for a minute.
It shouldn't be radical to say, but it is.
Yeah.
And they're performing something. People say, oh, investors, it's unproductive labor. By definition, it's what's called economic rent, which means that it's non-productive by definition. They always say that. And it's like, well, actually, investment is a type of productivity because you're adding liquidity to the market, which means that, just to bring you through some real economics, Liquidity means that things more often sell at their asking price versus selling at a reduced rate. So a market that has a lot of things selling at a reduced rate is an illiquid market, which is bad because it means you can't predict what the prices of things are.
Yeah, you want things to be liquid, flowing, again, not dam
you
it
don't want
up
to
with
dam it
low
up.
prices.
You don't want to store it in amber like Jurassic Park, you know?
Yeah. We all saw how that turned out.
Basically, liquid means that it's a seller's market instead of a buyer's market, because in a buyer's market, buyers can bid lower and get those prices. That's called illiquid. And if it's a seller's market and the seller can always get the price they want, that is called liquid. And the reason that investors are good, and this is a real argument from economics, cited on the Wikipedia page for investment as one of the arguments in favor of investors, is that they create liquidity, which means that sellers get higher prices from buyers, which is good. So no, it's not unproductive. It's actually quite productive in that it makes sure that prices remain high.
And it's such a shame that so many people don't understand that, don't understand basic economics, don't understand the second order effects of these things. And another major second order effect here is that if investors aren't getting their cut and decide not to build housing, what happens then to renters? And this is really the big thing here, is like the very people you're trying to protect, the one people who seemingly benefit from this. In the end, because there's such a slowdown in building, rents are going to skyrocket, especially in the non-rent controlled sector.
Yeah.
And
so that's the ironic part and the horrible part.
It's ironic, it's horrible. And the alternative to that, obviously, is you don't control the rents. The rents don't get cheaper. People build and build a lot because of the incentive provided by all the high rents. And then because they're building so much, then rents will start to slowly go down. And then they'll keep going down and keep going down, even though I said a minute ago that rents going down means that people won't build. But in this case, it's different, because when rents get cheaper because of more building, people keep building. But if rents get cheaper because of rent control, they stop building.
Yeah. I mean, that's just common sense.
Yeah.
That's why supply is key. And that's what the Occupy freaks don't understand. But I wish they would pick up a book and learn. The way to decrease prices is to increase supply. And the way to increase supply is to increase prices.
So you need to increase prices in order to decrease prices.
Exactly. Just follow through on the logical implications of those two extremely true core statements.
Laid it out so clearly.
You barely have to even explain. It is so clear what we should do and how general affordability is achievable if you just follow our policy prescriptions of deregulations, financial handouts for builders, and cutting protections for people who are allegedly vulnerable. But if you do the statistics, something like 15% of them actually could afford higher rents.
Right.
On a closing note here, I think my key point would be that there is such a thing as general economic efficiency, and that the way to tell when things are allocated correctly is through a single variable thing called a price.
That's what's so beautiful about it. It encompasses all other variables in one variable, so you don't have to think about everything else. It's just simple, clean.
So to restate that, there is something called economic efficiency. And when things are misallocated, it's because they're not being allocated to the rules and logic of prices under our economic system. Any evidence that allocations are out of sync are themselves proof that something called inefficiency has happened, because it is just tautologically true that if someone is paying a lower price than they might be willing to pay, it means that that thing is being given to someone who needs it less, desires it less, or it's less socially valuable to receive it.
Right.
I think that's kind of my big point here.
If you're willing to pay more for something, it means you value it more. It means you get a better value out of it, no matter what. And to all the listeners out there who have economically illiterate friends, family members, people out there, don't despair. This is an educational issue. Some of these things really are counterintuitive, but I hope that we've given you the toolkit to go out there today and say, here's why we need to keep prices high in order to reduce prices on rent. We've laid it out extremely clearly, and now it's your turn to go out there and spread the word, and let's make change happen.
Yeah, so when you're talking about this, ignore any of the benefits or complexities of the issue when talking about positive sides of rent control, and talk about the negatives, but in a way that's kind of a telephone game where you actually misrepresent what the studies say by creating a type of common sense that goes beyond what the studies can actually prove, and treat those things as unquestioned assumptions for further discussion.
Yeah, the studies are really just support for the model. The model is what comes first. There's a thing called supply and a thing called demand. And if you don't respect that, then you don't respect reality. And yeah, the studies, a lot of them line up with what we want. Some of them don't. That's just the real world. It's a bit messy. But focus on the model first.
To not focus on the model first is equivalent to like climate change denial, evolutionary denial,
right.
or any other sort of objective science. It's exactly the same.
Yeah, just like climate models.
So sign up on the Real Economics Tough Talk podcast Patreon, and we'll see you all next time. Don't forget to tip your landlord, because you don't know what they're going through right now, and you can't even imagine.
And to all my tenants out there listening who tipped me last month, thank you.
You can think of signing up on our Patreon as a kind of general purpose landlord tip for landlord education and the advancement of landlord interests. It's an indirect tip that will deliver big revenues to all landlords down the road as we increase economic education and literacy.
Wow, that was a bad show.
Yeah, I disagree with that podcast.
Yeah, definitely.
Here at Seriously Wrong, of which the podcast we are both hosts of, that we're about to
speaking of that, you want to start recording it and just hit play and welcome everybody to the Seriously Wrong podcast.
So did you hit play or did you hit record?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're right. I'll hit record. Welcome everybody to the Seriously Wrong podcast.
Oh, it's too bad we lost that take. That was a really good.
Well, it's can't win them all. My name is Aaron, and
my name's Sean.
We are talking this week about rent control.
Yeah, and before we get into that, I want to thank sincerely everyone for listening and people who donate to the show, participate in the Seriously Wrong Discord community, and so on. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Seriously wrong. So rent control is what we're talking about. We've been doing some research.
Yeah, looking into it. And it's a
I'll say it directly. Housing economists more broadly, they have an ideologically motivated obsession with debunking rent control, and it causes them to do a bunch of weird shit like make half-baked and frankly bizarre claims, exclude data in strange and unpredictable ways, or change the definition of things to suit the narrative of a given claim. Often claims from papers are exaggerated or misrepresented in other papers when they're cited. So you can see there's like a distortion matrix where very, very mild evidence is treated as absolutely definitive when it's cited by other housing economists. But if you read the actual paper itself, there's reasons to think that it's a fairly limited claim that can really be made based on the methodology they used. And then generally also just ignore political contexts and especially power contexts in the relationship to the things that they're measuring and talking about. Often they also treat core assumptions as tested conclusions using methodologies where core concepts are not being proven to exist. And all these things together create I'd say, somewhat delusional consensus in the economics world on rent control as some sort of demonic thing that makes housing disappear as if by wizards.
Yeah, it decreases supply. Just like Milton Friedman said, the only way to make money out of a rent-controlled apartment is to burn it down.
Because you have rent control in New York City, which makes it uneconomical to maintain the houses and means that the only way in which you can get any money out of them is by burning them down.
What good is it? If you can't make any money out of it, you got to just burn it down.
The only way in which you can get any money out of them is by burning them down.
The narratives on this stuff are wild. I was listening to various podcasts talking about this. One of them that really got under my skin is the Freakonomics podcast.
Landlords, whether small or large, are often left out of public discussions about property markets. And if they're not left out, they're usually drawn as villains.
This is like a well-recorded thing. It sounds like an NPR show. There's obviously a bunch of producers, editors, writers involved.
Decades worth of economic research describe the downsides of rent control. The first major paper was written in 1946 by Milton Friedman and George Stigler. Here's Friedman.
The only way in which you can get any money out of them is by burning them down.
And they're just saying these things that are on their face contradictory or don't make sense. Like one example is
Friedman also argued that rent control created a haphazard and arbitrary allocation of space.
Let's say you rented an apartment in New York in 1955. You had 3 small kids. You rented a 3-bedroom. By the late 80s, maybe your husband or wife actually died and you're living on your own in a 3-bedroom apartment in New York. But my goodness, would you ever move out? Your rent is a fraction of what the market rent is. The crazy thing about this is there were lots of New Yorkers who would love to have that apartment and who would get a lot more value out of it.
there's all these negative unintended consequences to people not moving. Rents will get higher and there's less building. There's, all these things.
Ed Glazer did his own analysis of rent control in New York City, trying to determine just how economically inefficient it was. Quote, this misallocation of bedrooms leads to a loss in welfare, which could be well over $500 million annually to the consumers of New York.
And then they're talking to the author of a particular study. People talk about this study all the time. It's in San Francisco, one of the biggest, best studies on rent control that exists.
Historically, people relied much more on theory in making their arguments about rent control.
That's Rebecca Diamond. She's a former student of Ed Glazer's. So you recently co-authored with a paper called The Effects of Rent Control Expansion on Tenants, Landlords, and Inequality, Evidence from San Francisco.
And they're saying, for the people whose rent is controlled, they obviously enjoy paying less rent. They have more security. They can stay in the neighborhood if they want to stay in the neighborhood. And
so if I'm an affordable housing advocate, I might say, oh, fine, fancy Stanford professor. I don't care that landlords are suffering, that the policy is having some downstream effects. I need to make sure that low-income people aren't going to get a rent increase of 50%.
That's the best bet you're going to get for the benefits of rent control to low-income tenants, the people that are already in the housing. But even though we find that those tenants are much more likely to stay in their apartment, when we look, 10, 15 years later, the share of those 1994 residents that are still there is down to, 10% or so. So 90% of them no longer live in that initial apartment.
My goodness, would you ever move out?
90% of them no longer live in that initial apartment.
you just laid out why there's all these horrible negative consequences to people not moving. And then at the end you said, well, and then they moved anyway. So the benefit of them not moving isn't there, but doesn't that also undo the negative effects of what you said? Or
The costs of them not moving are so great to us that it's absolutely untenable for our economy for this to continue. At the same time, the benefits that are allegedly being given aren't even being delivered because almost no one takes us up on the offer to destroy our economy.
The thing about people moving and whether it's good or bad is so confused on their point that there's this Bloomberg article where they do the exact same thing they did on Freakonomics, but kind of in the opposite way, where they're saying that rent control is bad because it causes people not to move. But then it says, and another bad thing about rent control is that it incentivizes landlords to convert rental units into condos, forcing tenants to move. And being forced to move is traumatic. Not only is it expensive, but it takes people out of their longtime communities. And this is two paragraphs apart from each other. Rent control is bad because it makes people less likely to move. And it's bad because being forced to move is traumatic. And a few people are forced to move, less apparently, because it decreases mobility, as you said 2 paragraphs ago. But for the ones who do move, it's traumatic. But if we didn't decrease the mobility so that people were moving more because they can't afford their apartment anymore, that wouldn't be traumatic, or that trauma doesn't matter, or it's so confused.
The thing I wanted to interrupt to say before is I feel like we have to tell people what mobility is and why anyone cares about it, because it's you've been listening to these maniacs that you've forgotten what it sounds like to... So basically, a bunch of these studies, one of the things they really focus on is decreased mobility, which means that people move out of their apartments less often, which is treated as just a de facto negative aspect of rent control because for a variety of, they have their strange reasons for it, one of which is increased mobility increases the liquidity of the market, bringing up rents to what the asking rents should be.
So it makes rents higher, basically, because that's what they say too, is that people will move into better apartments that cost more if their current apartment isn't rent controlled.
It's people have the option to move closer to their workplaces or their family, etc. Like that people being locked in place by having a location they stay at for a longer period of time in exchange for cheaper rent. It's robbing them of their ability to go pay higher rent somewhere else, rather than them making the choice to not do that because they want to keep their lower rent. And I think there's people who want to stay where they are and there's people who want to move. And so it's kind of just a wash to have more or less mobility.
Yeah. Like there's an intuitive benefit there. I would like it if there were hundreds of apartments that I could move into that were all the same price as this one, and they were all different and in different neighborhoods. And, you know, like if I had that choice, that would be better. But they're not saying
in
like
the housing utopia where there's just like a set rate and you can pop over by the beach for a couple of years. You can pop over to...
where it's illegal for landlords to ask how much money you make, but also your rent is based on how much money you make. So you can move into any apartment and it will cost what you're paying, which is the same amount you always pay everywhere. That's one system that could give you that kind of choice, that mobility. That would really increase mobility. You could move literally anywhere for just moving fees and pay the same. That's just a random policy idea for mobility.
Mobility lovers take note.
But, you know, like they're not offering me that. They're offering me the mobility of, oh, they're going to double my rent. I have to either pay that or move into another apartment. And wow, isn't that great? You have more options now. And it's like, I don't have more options now. I have the option to move into an apartment that costs double my rent right now. I have that option. What you're doing is taking away the option of me staying here. So like the mobility, it's not that something was taken away from me. It's that I don't want to move because there's no option that's as good as the current one. And you're like, oh, we better take away that current option so that you have no better options and you're forced to move. And then never even mentioning that it might also be the thing that forces them to move further away from their schools or their workplace because they can no longer afford to live in the neighborhood that's close.
Well, yeah. That's a general principle.
That's also mobility.
The housing economics bullshit stuff, it's like one of the cruxes of it is that positive, immaterial, non-graph, non-number things are invisible and irrelevant and are to be downplayed as even existing at all. Like, so any good side of rent control is treated as invisible and untouchable and untalkaboutable because it can't be studied as clearly as something like rent numbers or amount of housing starts, etc. But the things that are negative about rent control need to be focused on and treated as like the unintended consequences are what the policy itself means. Like the San Francisco study says that it increases income inequality because poor minorities aren't displaced effectively, meaning that the gap between the rich and the middle income is lower than the gap between the rich and the poor. So it makes the argument this is contributing to income inequality. This is the paper that's being cited by like the Canadian government right now against rent control.
It's like graph madness. It's like you just get sucked into a graph and you think that you're living in it. And it's the same with that stat about crime went down by 16% when they removed rent control in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And like, you can say just that. And it's like, what do you mean? Like people just decided to stop committing crimes when their rents went higher? Does higher rents just somehow socially incentivize people to be upstanding citizens? Or like, yeah, those people were forced out and they went somewhere else. Did they commit crimes somewhere else? It's like, well, you don't have stats on that. Did they, like, what happened to them after? And was it good for them that they were forced out? And like, you focus on this one number and like, yeah, sure, in a vacuum, crime going down is better than crime going up. Like everyone wants there to be less reason to feel unsafe in your neighborhoods or whatnot. But like,
yeah, assuming that we're talking about crimes that are socially impactful and not arbitrary. It's like loitering and littering has decreased since rents got raised or something, you know, jaywalking is down. I mean,
but yeah, it's like you're doing a study on one area and you're displacing the problem, not solving it. Like a neighborhood got nicer because you pushed all the poor people out isn't the win for the policy that you're claiming it is by just focusing on this crime reduction rate.
Yeah, it's one of the things that it carries this unconscious assumption. You see this a lot in kind of like centrist law and order policies in general and right-wing law and order policies is just kind of the unspoken assumption that people will cease to exist and there'll be some sort of invisible genocide. Like I feel that way when I'm reading like neoliberal government papers and stuff, is like when you exclude the secondary impacts of like poor, vulnerable, et cetera, communities, it's like there's this invisible clause at the end, is like we assume someone at some point will do a genocide that makes our conclusions valid.
Yeah, the only other option, is that like something crazy like being charged more rent makes you just suddenly commit less crime and have more money to pay the rent, and you just, through virtue of paying more, you become a better citizen.
The CMHC paper, this is like the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation. It's the Crown Corporation that deals with housing affordability in Canada and makes recommendations. When I was citing these papers, doing kind of like a meta-analysis of rent control literature, said that lower rents would lower the incentive for people to be productive and seek out economic opportunities and stuff,
right?
Because their needs would be met and they wouldn't have to be. And this
keep them poor and starving, and then they'll work.
These are reports that advise Canadian government policy on issues like rent control,
right,
claiming that higher rents will make people get off their butt. As a scientific, study-based conclusion, is a summary of the best evidence on rent control includes this. They also cite that rent control may increase inequality, citing
the thing that you just talked about how not pushing poor people out of the neighborhood makes the neighborhood more unequal.
And I think graph madness is exactly right. I think you're spot on there. That graph madness really does summarize part of what's happening here. This episode is brought to you by price distortions.
Oh, look at that. We had a beautiful price here. It's all distorted. Oh, God.
Oh, my God. Someone well-meaning doesn't understand the consequences of their actions. It's completely distorted.
They're going about their day. They're not thinking about the unintended consequences. And then there's a distortion. There's a distortion. Distortions popping up all around you. And soon, none of the numbers are pristine.
We get home from the mall, and the price is distorted. And she says, I distorted it. I'm like, no, hey, no, wait, probably you distorted it. Their family price? Yeah, it's badly distorted. I think she probably did it. I would remember if I distorted it. Maybe the dog got on the counter and distorted it, for Christ's sake. And she's yelling at me.
Ah! Oh my God. Okay, no. Whew. I was looking at that price and I thought it was distorted, but I was just looking through a funhouse mirror. Sorry, that scared me for a second there.
Hey, nice sandwich shop you got here. Beautiful prices. Be a shame if somebody distorted them. You got time for a meeting?
Price distortions in the market. Proud sponsor of Seriously Wrong.
So you mentioned vacancy chains of the poorer. Someone moves into a new unit and their last unit becomes vacated, freeing up a cheaper unit, and so on. So one thing they believe in is vacancy chains. Another they believe is that rent control is bad. The only thing that could make a vacancy chain work in that literal sense is if there's something called vacancy control, which is like a rent control that applies between tenants. Right. What we have in BC is we have vacancy decontrol, which means between tenants they can raise rent as much as they want. But as long as you're in a lease, there's a regular allowable rent rate.
So thinking there's a person living in a cheaper apartment because of rent control, it's cheaper. And without rent control, they would move out of that cheaper apartment into a more expensive apartment. And then that cheaper apartment would be available for people. And it's like, well, no, but the apartment that they're living in is only cheaper because of the rent control. So if you get rid of the rent control, they're going to be just living in an expensive apartment, and maybe they would move into a different expensive apartment or a slightly more expensive apartment. But the original apartment is only cheap because of the rent control. So you can't say get rid of the rent control so someone else can live in that cheap apartment.
Yeah. And the evidence for this, if you read the literature, which I have actually, flex in. If you read the literature on this, the evidence that they have that such a thing happens is that they track through a public database of people's like addresses and stuff. They track people's movement from neighborhood to neighborhood. They don't actually track the rents, but they track that when a vacated unit is filled, who is that person? Where do they come from?
Right.
And they track it out. This has been done in a few different cities and stuff. This is like the main methodology for this claim. And what they show is that X percentage of units down multiple layers of vacancy chain come from poorer postal codes in general. So the assumption is that each postal code has an average rent. Every person in there is roughly paying that rent.
Mm-hmm.
So people moving from poorer to richer postal codes is what they're looking for. And obviously, they're able to show to some degree, I can't remember the exact details off the top of my head, but it's like for every 10 new units you bring in, you get this many affordable units opening up down the vacancy chain. But the issue is that within a postal code, there's variations within incomes. So it does not necessarily indicate economic mobility, although it may in some cases. But also, if there's vacancy decontrol, the old unit is going to be lifted up to in a rent stabilized system. By moving out, it increases the rent. So in the best case scenario of a vacancy chain, every tenant is paying more rent than they were. And so what's good about the vacancy chain to the housing economist, it's moving the system towards liquidity. It's efficiently allocating rent resources by having everyone's rent increase.
Yeah.
So while they claim it as this beautiful affordability measure, that downstream in poor neighborhoods, units are going to open up that are statistically on average going to be lower than the units that are getting filled, meaning that the lower end of the housing supply is getting vacancies that allow people to move in. But the thing that's really secretly beautiful about this, and I'm psychoanalyzing now, is that it's a chain of people who are paying higher rents than they just were. And they were just paying less suboptimal rents.
Yeah.
And they've made this market transaction that shows all of them are affirming. It's this beautiful cascade of all these free market actors affirming what percentage of their income they're willing to pay and in exchange for what, because of how valuable it is to them.
And then the really beautiful thing is they all are paying higher rents. Everybody's paying higher rents. And through the beauty of the market, that's going to incentivize more building to happen. And when the builders, they're going to be so incentivized, it's going to be like a frenzy. They're going to build so much. They're just... You increase the incentives and they're like ants building an ant colony. It happens. And then
obsessive, maniacal for smaller and smaller margins, with more and more severity and intensity. If we relax that red tape, we cut fees, we give them grants, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it just throw everything you can at them.
So if you don't see that frenzy of building, it means that you haven't
cut regulations enough.
Yeah, you haven't done it enough. It's
grants.
Like you're not a true believer. You have to keep on going. You have to, and obviously it's not long enough to see real results, and you barely did any at all. You have to double down.
It's so, again, one of those on the face contradictory things. Artificially decreasing rents with rent control, that means nobody will build. But naturally decreasing rents through people building a lot won't cause people to stop building. And then I'm getting video notifications on my Google thing for this video called "Landlords Are Getting Wrecked" in all caps in Vancouver, or about to get wrecked in Vancouver. And he's talking about how they can only charge $2,300 for a 2-bedroom in Surrey, which is like a suburb of Vancouver.
I was just talking to my property manager buddy who rented out like the best location in Surrey Central, brand new build, 2-bedroom for... It was either $2,150 or $2,250. I can't remember the exact number. But those were renting for $3,000 a month at one point, maybe even a little bit more.
And this building frenzy that was happening is going to dry up because the pro formas aren't going to work anymore.
I've talked about the supply gap a lot, right? It looked like there was going to be a huge supply gap. But the thing is, if you take a look at this now, right? Purpose-built rental housing is the green line. Look how much we're building. And the thing about this is as rents have fallen, vacancy rates have gone up, you might see a lot less people starting to build these, right? Because if you thought you were going to get an average of $2,200 a month rent, and now it's $1,900, maybe your pro forma doesn't make sense anymore. You thought vacancy was going to be 2%, now it's 4%. Maybe it doesn't make sense to build these anymore. So you could see this pipeline start to dry up.
Basically saying nobody's going to want to build anymore because we built so much and rents are going down. But the numbers that he's citing as low rents are pretty deep. Like a 2-bedroom for $2,300 is not horrible in my warped world of Vancouver rents, but it's still a lot of money. It's not where I would peg affordability. So yeah, I just watching this video being oh yeah, it's just a landlord saying that rents, before they're even close to getting to affordable, are too cheap for it to incentivize landlords to build anything.
Yeah, and that's also a type of graph madness, but it's the graph madness of the landholder, which I think has a certain tone. It's got a it's a vampiric panic.
Maybe your pro forma doesn't make sense anymore. Maybe it doesn't make sense to build these anymore. So you could see this pipeline start to dry up.
Whereas there's also the other graph madness, which is more like the Freakonomics graphs madness, where it's like you're sitting around looking at spreadsheets so long that you, like Nikola Tesla falls in love with a pigeon, you fall in love with like what the implications of the data might say if you normalize it, or the other terms that they use for when they start massaging the data to look. So these people, they don't become graph mad out of self-interest. They become graph mad out of love of the graph.
First, if you would talk about the data.
So yeah, we have some really cool data.
So I just want to build out
those two
categories.
Types. Yeah.
There's a symbiotic relationship between the vampiric panic of the grifter class and the spreadsheet-brained. Like they have a collaborative relationship in a way. There's a more self-interested and maybe even intentionally deceptive side. And then there's like the well-meaning true believer.
When you pass rent control, the landlords of the property suddenly getting covered by rent control are losing so much money. They no longer really want to rent their apartments.
And maybe they flow into each other a bit, but they definitely, together, they are, housing economics is built of these two factions working in a collective way.
Landlords, whether small or large, are often left out of public discussions about property markets. And if they're not left out, they're usually drawn as villains.
Yeah, and because it has all these weird contradictions in it, they can just highlight different parts of the system and claim that it all fits together.
Yeah, exactly. The square rim glasses guy, he looks like Rivers Cuomo, and he's got a collar, and he's like, hey, I want affordability. He's at the tenants meeting. Hey, we all want affordability here, right, guys? And, but I'm looking at this literature. I think, it's like a science. We have to accept it, even if we, it's like evolution.
It's true. It's like climate change.
You have to deregulate the rental market and get rid of all rent controls, because we're going to have a 20% decrease in real rents, that is rents accounted for inflation, over 20 years.
Yeah, or there's going to be a 15% decrease in supply if we pass rent control. And then you look into it and it's like, oh, by decrease in supply, you meant some of them were sold to people who lived in them instead of people who rented them out. And some of them were taken out of the rent control pool because they did renovations on them so they could charge higher rents.
This is the same San Francisco study. That's like the extreme way to cite it. That's like the way that the telephone game thing I was talking about happens, is like a 15% decrease in supply. If you say that,
it sounds like there's 15% less houses or like apartments than there were before.
Yeah, 15% of apartments disappeared, or 15% less apartments were built than otherwise would have been built, or like there's a couple different ways that you could, but that's not really what it's saying. It's saying that in the specific context of a specific San Francisco rent control regime, where some older units were protected with rent control, with vacancy decontrol, but like rent stabilization, and some newer units didn't have those protections, they found that over 22 years, it was 15% more likely that the protected rental units would either be turned into a condo for owner occupation or redeveloped into a new, likely more dense apartment building that no longer has rent control. So the 15% loss in the telephone game, that could turn into any imagination of what that means, 15% less. But what it actually meant is that over 22 years, 15% more rent control units in San Francisco were converted or redeveloped.
Compared to non-rent controlled units.
Which allows you to escape rent control.
But then also, like, the law was that the rent control only applied to units built before 1979. So what they're really saying is that units built before 1979, on average, were more likely to be redeveloped than units built after that time. And it's like, well, yeah, because they're older. And like the supply of rent-controlled housing keeps decreasing. It's like, well, yeah, because it only includes units built before a specific year. You're never going to increase it because you can't build new units before a specific year after that year happened. Like, it's only going to decrease. Like,
yeah, it's a one-way path where controlled units become decontrolled under certain circumstances, and no new controlled units are being entered. Then it's like a mathematical certainty under any system that you're going to have a net decrease in units over time. And if you're tying it to a year in particular, the older an apartment is, the older a building is, the more often there is needed maintenance. So
yeah, or like needed renovation, it's like it just is gonna happen. And like, so then you're like, oh, it's a weakness of the policy that rent control actually decreases the supply of rent controlled housing specifically. And it's like, well, it is kind of a weakness of this policy, but that's just because it's designed in a way that has all these loopholes that you can get out of it, where the year never changes. It's not like every year it's rent controlling more buildings as it goes on. Next year it's 1980, next year it's 1981. But they're saying that's like a weakness of rent control. They're making it sound like houses are disappearing. But what they're really just saying is that the policy has this one-way route where they can only become decontrolled. And that's like a very specific thing to how this policy is set up.
And there's this supply definition wobble game being played here where you're like, it's restricting the amount of housing supply. But it's talking in this case just specifically about rent-controlled supply. They never talk about introducing rent-controlled supply as a solution to this kind of problem. But if you think about supply in general, redevelopment can mean an increase to density. So it might be that these sites are contributing more to
like
new
overall
units.
Supply,
Yeah. Not that that's my desired policy outcome, but just to be consistent within these frameworks. And units that are converted from rental units into ownership units, that seems to me pretty neutral on supply. You can make the argument that an increase in condo supply, like using by your economic logic and so on, like an increase in condo supply could decrease the net cost of condos or whatever, that it would be have a benefit, and that it makes it easier for people to achieve some type of home ownership or something. I mean, it depends on what your values are here, but at the very least, I don't see having a rental unit be converted into a condo to be like an inherent negative when compared to really like the big issue is that there's a loss of one unit that was rent controlled. The addition of the condos more
could remedy by like adding more rent control to more units. It'd be more fair too, because it's like, imagine you had a building that was built in 1979 and your neighbor landlord has a building that was built in 1980, and then they're just laughing at you because they get to make all this money for decades afterwards. Their building is non-rent controlled. If it was like every year it moved up, it would just be a lot more fair.
They're getting new renovations, new shiny new tenants. They're laughing at you from the balcony across, the panels falling off and stuff. You're pulling out your pockets, a little moth flying away. You're like, why did San Francisco do this to me with such an unfair... Now, I support the principle of rent control, and I'm certainly, at the end of the day, making a lot of money right now for doing very little work because I'm rich. But on the other hand, this relationship with my neighbor it's fostered is so frustrating to me. That's what we're hearing from landlords in San Francisco, which is left out of this paper as well, I might add.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the starship Econoprize and its 5-year mission to seek out new deals, new economic efficiencies, and new mutually beneficial transactions and market synergies, to boldly invest where nobody has invested before.
Captain, there's a distortion. There's a distortion in the price field.
What? Let me see those readings. That can't be.
Everything's getting scrambled, sir. These prices aren't right at all.
Don't these people look at the graphs?
Captain, I've seen this before. It's rent control.
Why would they do that? Why would they do that to their people? Now, many of these civilizations are not malicious. They just don't understand economics.
Captain, have they not read the most recent meta-analysis on rent control? It'd be highly illogical to keep it after that.
You know, I struggle with that every day. We could be giving a leg up to these people by providing them with our meta-analyses on rent control. The prime directive that we don't let any civilization into the Federation until they've abolished all rent control forever. Because until you've done that, it's like, are you really a civilization? But on the other hand, if they knew that the data kind of, if you jigger it a bit, roughly fits the graphs, they would see the light. And it's like, but would we be robbing them of their own development? This is the burden of being the more advanced civilization who understands economics.
Captain, the price distortions are interfering with our gravitron fields. I'm going to be increasing liquidity. Permission to deregulate, sir.
Oh, you know permission is always granted. Engage deregulation.
Deregulation. Prices normalizing.
Oh, look at that. The distortions, they're clearing out. Turn up the deregulation knob even higher. We need knobs that can spin around and spin around and spin around endlessly.
Increasing supply.
There's no reason for the knob to ever stop. We need more knobs.
Prices normalizing. Prices normalizing. Normal. It's done. And there you can see the people being pushed out. Inequality's decreasing, sir.
We did it.
We did it.
We saved ourselves and the universe. Can I have a moment with you aside in my office?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I hope it's not performance related. I love being one of the officers on the ship and going around the universe making transactions and kind of get nervous though because I don't know as much as you about economics.
So I know you think nobody was looking, but I saw you sent a signal down to the surface of the planet to send them some of the meta-analyses. You know that's against the Prime Directive, right? You're interfering with their society.
Sir, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I just wanted to say that your secret's safe with me.
Is that so, sir?
Sometimes you just give the people what they need.
Oh, we have a saying with my people, sir. Nisha bumahu hasgin warabani. It means unlock supply.
Inda halila chapala to you.
I'd like to think that I've unlocked the supply of some new free thinkers. And down the road, housing.
I feel like it's a theme among a lot of rent control critiques is that they'll be like, there's this festering wound of the housing market and you slapped this band-aid of rent control on it, and then the festering part just seeped out the other side. This is the band-aid's fault. This is rent control's fault. Look at all that seepage from the wound. That's not caused by the wound itself, of course. It's caused by rent control. It's like you passed rent control, and then only the rent-controlled apartments were cheaper. The ones that weren't rent-controlled got more expensive. And it's like, well, yeah, because unregulated markets aren't indexing the price of housing to human need. They're indexing it to these graph madness variables that they're using. So, yeah, that was the original problem. And the policy, the half-assed policy that we designed, only put a Band-Aid over part of it. And then the part that didn't have a Band-Aid over it continued to get worse. And I mean, like, I'm sure that yeah, it's like, oh, it got worse at a rate like slightly higher than it would have got worse. But that would be their argument, just to be clear. And
also, just to be clear, I haven't actually seen any evidence for that is in any way convincing from trying to find it.
But even if it was there, that isn't the fault of rent control. Rent control is like a fine Band-Aid, but it's not going to solve the housing crisis. It's not like we're saying the utopia of housing is the exact system we have now plus rent control. It's more like this is a way to give people immediate relief and genuinely help real people right now. And then we have to talk about like public options for housing. We need to talk about providing for human need outside the market system, because the market system is really bad at dealing with things that have inelastic demand, like housing, where, you know, you have to live in a house. And no matter how high the rents get, it's not like in supply and demand, oh, if the cost goes up, then people are going to demand it less. But that can't happen in housing because no matter how much the cost goes up, your demand is still going to be there. You still want to live in a house, even if you can't. So market forces are fundamentally ill-equipped to dealing with the housing market. So non-market solutions are the only way to go about it that make any sense. On that level, I'm like, yeah, rent control isn't a panacea that's going to fix all the problems. But yeah, it seems like this entire narrative that rent control is bad has this huge strain of blaming a partial solution, a Band-Aid, for the problems that it's trying to help with.
Yeah, I agree entirely that, rent control is not the only policy solution to the housing crisis. We need public, cooperative, social, rent geared to income housing for every income level, robust tenant and displacement protections. There's a variety of things I could list off that would be beneficial in housing. But I think one thing, a really important thing, is using the power of the state to pace the market and control the runaway costs of housing and housing production.
Which it always does. Like the Fed in America or the Bank of Canada here sets interest rates for bank loans, which basically sets mortgage rates. Like there's a central body controlling the housing prices of all the people who have mortgages and indirectly controlling housing prices of people who are renting. It's like that layer of control is never questioned. It's totally fine. Nobody's saying that it should be eliminated. There's no economists are saying that. It's fine when there's these decision makers making the decisions on that level, but when politicians try to make the decisions on the level of like rent control, suddenly like any top-down imposition is horrible. But like there is no system aside from top-down imposition. It's all a system that we created, that the authority within those systems are delegated to certain bodies that make decisions. It's not some natural system, this market. It's a designed system that has people at the wheel.
Yeah, and on whether rent control is a panacea or not, I think also we shouldn't undersell what a degree of panacea it is, because it directly creates housing affordability without needing to finance the construction of units from the state perspective. Like if you look in Vancouver at the statistics of the amount of affordable units under certain benchmarks that have disappeared year, over 10 years or whatever, over a period of time, it's like we're losing tens of thousands of units that are at levels that are affordable according to census data because it's being redeveloped or people are moving out and having the rents increase between and so on. So the existence of stronger rent control in BC over the last 15, 20 years or whatever would result in materially a far larger percentage of the population paying a much smaller amount of rent. And to all of those people, it is a panacea.
That's true. Yeah. Also, I live in an apartment that is rent control. I've talked about this on the podcast before. I mean, all of BC has this thing where they can only raise it a certain amount every year. If I move out, they can charge basically double what I'm paying for it right now. So I'm like, yeah, one of those people whose mobility is being quote unquote limited by the rent control. That I'm like, I've said before, I'm like, I'm only staying in this apartment because everywhere else is twice as expensive or more. But it's also literally the only thing that lets me live in Vancouver in this neighborhood. Wouldn't be able to afford it otherwise. It doesn't feel like a restriction to me. It does feel like a panacea. But yeah, there's new horizons of panacea. It would be more panacea-like if I knew that if I moved out, the next person who moved into this apartment would also be enjoying the rent that I'm enjoying. Because if I move out, that's an affordable unit gone, like on those metrics.
Yeah, from the world. I had a feeling of guilt about moving out of an apartment after I did it. Yeah. And like, oh, that's going to be so much more expensive now. I just robbed the working class with me as the conduit by moving. Like on net, the poor of the world are now going to be paying at least $500 more. Like there's no.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, also the thing about the graph madness, like using you as an example here in this 1-bedroom rent controlled, was it a 10 or 12-year lease or something?
12-year lease?
Like how long have you been?
Yeah. I've been here 12 years, 12 and a half.
About 12. You've protected the affordability of this unit for the working class by staying here.
Yeah.
But in like their graph universe, they don't know whether or not it's good for this neighborhood for you to be here or it's good for you to be in this neighborhood.
Yeah, that's irrelevant. It's irrelevant unless you're saying maybe it would be better for me to not be here. Think about that. Like you can say that, but you can't say the opposite. Yeah,
you might have missed out on an opportunity to move to another neighborhood, which would have in some direct but unpredictable way made your quality of life far better.
Yeah.
And maybe that's true. And maybe that's just a crazy old thing about the world is that you never know what might have been. But on the other hand, it's like you're contributing to the local businesses around here, the local grocery store and so on, but maybe you're contributing less than a newer, richer tenant would. Maybe. But also maybe you have less sensitivity to price increases at the grocery store because you're saving money on rent and therefore you're more willing to pay the inflated local prices.
Right. Who knows?
But then also you are, I hate to say this, it's not an insult, you are a small businessman who is, you are helping run a small business partnership out of Vancouver, contributing to the local economy.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is unlikely a new tenant would do.
Yeah, that'd be a local small business shuttering if... at least shuttering its Vancouver operation. If I was moved out.
That's exactly, that is what happened. If they got rid of your rent control, it's nearly a 100% chance that Seriously Wrong and the Wrong Boys Media Foundation writ large would become an operation of another municipality.
Yeah, big loss for Vancouver.
That's right. And you think about all the global interest we bring into the Vancouver, it is tragic. And that's the type of thing that this graph madness can't. Also, the artistic dimension that you bring to Vancouver as well. I mean, you're the whole package. And the thing that for Vancouver.
Well, thank you.
From Vancouver's perspective, I mean, to lose out on this opportunity, on this developmental thing, because that was enabled by rent control, by rent stabilization here. I mean, it's almost impossible to put numbers on what the loss would be if they enabled the rents to be jacked up in this unit beyond what you could afford to pay. These graph mad freaks, these graph mad true believers and these graph mad grifters, they have an interest in not being able to reflect that dimension of life. Not to mention the personal cost. I mean, it sucks to be pushed out of a neighborhood that you love or have to leave a neighborhood you love for any reason. But to have it happen against your will because of a financial calculation, it's like, that's closer to like your dog dying than fucking changing shampoos, that's for sure.
Yeah. I do really like this neighborhood. If I was forced out of here, I'd probably move to Surrey, New West, Richmond, Burnaby. I don't know which one. Find an apartment that is probably more expensive than the one I live in, but like, cheap enough I could kind of swing it. So
in a less walkable neighborhood with worse transit.
Yeah. I would have to pay a bit more in rent. I'd have to pay more in gas because I'd be driving more, but maybe there'd be some other benefits.
Yeah, I mean, the environmental benefit.
I mean, there'd be more liquidity because I'd be paying more for rent.
That's right. And that might incentivize you to contribute to the economy at a higher degree.
Right, yeah. Maybe I would say, Sean, we can't do the podcast anymore. I'm going to become a real estate agent or something.
Right, yeah. Or we're going to have to start balancing seriously wrong real estate operations more. And
Right.
Yeah.
And then I become real estate brained and I start like bringing different ideas to the show.
Inviting guests on the show that I'm not interested in the subject matter of. We become a real estate advisory podcast.
Responding to that email we got recently from a guy who was like, I love your show. Do you want me to come on and talk about helping new businesses get more capital? I think it would fit right in with your... I don't know if you saw this. It's like we got like 3 emails from this person.
I did see that, yeah.
Who specifically said they liked the joke in the transit episode where we said that passengers would fall into the earth. It was something I didn't even recognize us saying.
Yeah, no, we've got a few, like I think a lot of these emails are AI now.
Yeah, AI read the transcript of our podcast and was like, here's a good joke of what they said. I almost wanted to respond to that guy, bring him on the show and be like, so what else did you like about our podcast? You said you really like it. Before we get into anything else, can we just talk about that?
Yeah, we're a sucker for compliments, so we'll really get the show revved up. We're always at our best when we feel kind of gassed up.
So yeah,
knowing that you listened to it and you loved it, it brightened our whole day and it made us, and we were like, should we have him on? We're like, well, he listened to the show, he loved it. So
yeah, maybe he could give us more details of what he loved and we could just talk about that for a bit. Anyway, so they got off topic there, but
in general, looking at rent control, I mean, the stuff that it does well. You make it stronger, it does it better. And the core stuff that it does is prevent a transfer from poorer people to richer people based on the metric of them being richer, which is like the most important part of the landlord-tenant relationship and the ability to access the housing market as a buyer as down payments. It's also the case that rents are inflated by rich investing middlemen at multiple layers: mortgage interest, developer fees, landlord fees, and so on.
We can cut into those things with rent control. And if the economist's worst nightmare happened and the incentive disappears and people stop building, well, first of all, I know we were just wrapping up, but my understanding is that there isn't any good evidence that like building actually slows down because of rent control.
Yeah.
It's all the decrease in supply stuff is like that weird, it's like, what do you mean by supply in this instance? And
supply being converted under a specific regime that allows conversion and doesn't add new.
Yeah. So the building won't slow down, but they fearmonger that it will slow down. And if it did, we could, as a government, build things. I've done it before, could do it again. It's a thing. And that you would cut out a lot of those middlemen. You could do it for a lot cheaper. Governments have ways to get land and buildings that are cheaper. They could not even build, they could purchase buildings at a decreased price from all these desperate landlords who want to get out of the game. And the government could rent them out at cheaper prices according to not just rent controlled levels, but as a percentage of income, that kind of thing. So it's like, yeah, rent control, what it does do, it does really well. And even if the worst nightmares of the people who are against it came to pass, there's like other policy solutions that would be a wonderful complement to rent control. And the worst nightmare things that they talk about, there's no evidence that that really happens.
Yeah, it's a mix of there's no evidence that it happens. It's not even a bad thing.
These vultures won't want to get their cut out of the process anymore because their cut will be too small. It's like, okay.
I think a housing system that is seeking to create affordability through incentives directed at profit-seeking actors, so having a private market-led housing affordability project, it's a self-contradictory and foolish endeavor. It's like the incentives, the straightforward incentives of that is perpetually increasing rents. The whole premise of like, oh, let's change the incentives to enable the development of housing, just to be clear, like it can't really be an affordability strategy because as rents lower, the return on investment goes down and you have a de facto capital strike, which is when the pro formas don't pencil and people stop building, you stop building. So it's a self-regulating system towards higher and higher rents. It's not an intentional conspiracy. It is a result of the nature of the market system itself. So I want to underline this whole incentives conversation is stupid. It doesn't really make sense, especially in the light of like, if you're arguing against rent stabilization or vacancy control, and your argument for that is that it will have a negative effect on housing development, which might be true to some degree or something, but I haven't seen it proven. Maybe it's the case that policies have trade-offs within them. And for the great benefit of a huge amount of people being able to afford where they live and not being pushed out of their community, in exchange for that, you're going to get some percentage less new starts, new builds or whatever.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some sort of compensatory policy that you can figure out to push it in the right direction. So maybe instead of thinking of it as an unintended consequence, we could think of it as an intended consequence that gets something really good for really cheap.
Yeah,
in political terms.
Yeah, like a slight trade-off for a really good effect that we can mitigate in other ways if it ever becomes necessary. These are like political questions a lot of the time too. Like, what is the value of all of these tenants whose rents are now protected and their lives being so much better, more stable? They can stay in the neighborhood they want to stay in. They have more choice. And then what is the benefit of like more investors getting their cut, more bankers getting their cut? In some vague way, maybe down the line, the rate of rent increases will decrease because the building happens so much. And that it's like weighing those two things against one another. There is no graph that takes all of that into account. There's a level where this is a qualitative discussion of like, what outcomes do we want? And not that there's a straightforward answer of one outcome is 8 and the other one is 9 and 9 is better because it's a higher number. Like so much of the qualitative aspects of reality don't fit into that.
Yeah, and some of these consequences are ambiguous and whether they are negative or not in the first place. Sometimes you also see the argument that it decreases property values and therefore like decreases tax revenue as another argument. It's another one that's like, it's an ambiguous or neutral or even potentially positive thing. Like if property values are accommodating the expenses that are incurred by regulation on running rental properties, so you can get less money for a rental property because of the rent control, I don't see why I should give a damn about that at all. It sounds fine. Apartments are less expensive to buy for...
Yeah. In another context, they'd be talking about higher property values as a bad thing because it makes it harder to buy buildings or makes it harder to build buildings because it costs more. So like
the speculative value of a property is based on what sort of profits and returns one can anticipate getting in the future. And it's a pump that pulls the money of working people, the labor of working people, up through the pump of land ownership, which is like a vacuum tube that pulls money from the poor to the rich. So the degree that you can do that is going to be embedded in the purchase price of things. So decreasing the degree that you can do that decreases the purchase price of things. And you're telling me that this is my concern, that rents should be higher instead of that?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? My concern is that it's a $20 million building when it might have otherwise been a $44 million building. If they were allowed to charge the people who live there a higher rent for no better reason than the fact that the person who owns the building has more money, the firm that owns the building has more money than the people who don't have access to ownership. You telling me I want that number to go up? We now go to two parents scaling the side of a volcano, carrying their firstborn children.
Almost there. Just one more shove and then... Okay.
Ooh, it's hot up here.
Yeah. That
Quiet
lava.
down, quiet down.
It's okay. It won't be so hot anymore soon. So, let me just get this straight. You said, if we sacrifice our firstborn children, the housing market, it's going to get cheaper, right? Like our rent's going to go down?
Not exactly. So we do have to sacrifice our firstborn children to the market and housing gods by throwing them in the volcano. But
that's why we're here. Yeah.
So that much is true. But the rents won't go down. They'll just go up less than they would in the counterfactual where we didn't sacrifice our firstborn children to the housing market gods.
Right.
So don't expect rents to go down, but expect rents to rise slower than they would have been in the universe where we didn't do this.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, it's not that I don't love my baby. I do love my baby. But all things have trade-offs.
That's right. No, yeah, keeping your baby might sound good on paper.
Right.
If you're naive.
But there's unintended consequences.
Right, yeah, like it makes it harder to build.
It's a little counterintuitive sometimes what might happen.
It increases vacancy rates in the long term by sacrificing firstborns. If you think of all those firstborns were still alive,
right,
you'd have more people competing for the non-rent controlled units.
Totally. And it'd be unfair, too, because everyone else has sacrificed their firstborn. So if we just stopped sacrificing our firstborn, what about all the people before us who did? You know, that's not fair to them. So, again, babe, I love you, but it's time to say goodbye.
Hello, little baby, and goodbye, little baby. Yeah, I sacrifice you now.
Toss mine in, too. Whew. Oh, that's rough. That's hard to watch.
Well, anything to end the crisis of homelessness.
Yeah, that's the real problem and the real solution. What the gods want, the gods should get. I think what happened today was beautiful in a way.
Yeah. No, and I think if rent growths don't slow as compared to counterfactual, it's a good reason to think that maybe some people are secretly hiding their firstborns and not sacrificing them.
Right.
So we should maybe investigate that. If we don't see any movement on the market front, we should start investigating each other and looking for those hidden kids.
Or, you know, sometimes just maybe you have to up your counterfactual. You weren't comparing it to the wrong made-up number that it's less than.
Right, yeah.
If you just make the counterfactual higher, then...
Right.
Yeah, like it's...
Maybe the market's saying too, well, firstborn, that's great, but how about secondborn? How about thirdborn? Let's have a conversation.
Well, that's true too.
Maybe that's what the market's saying.
I mean, yeah, you do have to interpret the messages of the god of the market and housing.
Yeah, but it sends signals through prices.
Yeah, which it is really efficient that way, that it's just the one signal and it's...
Yeah.
It gives you all information that you need. That's kind of the holy aspect of it, is that it contains the all in the one and the one in the all.
Right.
And the beginning and the end and the almighty and the, I mean, you know our religion, but...
Yeah. And of course there's evil opposite, which will try to distort the prices and mislead us into believing the distorted prices are true prices and vice versa.
Right.
Which makes it even more important to sacrifice the firstborn.
Yeah, because sometimes it can be hard to tell what's a distorted price and what's a real price, and then you're just lost in confusions about, you know, what's God, what's the devil, and the only way to be sure is to have a pure market with no distortions anywhere, pristine as far as the eye can see. And for that, you just, as many babies as are needed. You can always make more.
Right, it's true, yeah. And if you want to get a fresh start, you can just start at one again, sacrifice the first one, and keep an eye on the market.
All right, it's hot up here. Do you want to scale back down? And
Yep. Bye-bye, children. Thank you for your service to nature itself, I guess. That's probably the best way to think of it.
I hear that up in heaven, they're always building, and you always pay the most amount that you can afford. Right. So you have that to look forward to, my sweet, sweet children.
Yeah, it does make me feel a lot better to know that they're in a place where markets have reached equilibrium, where prices are undistorted, and everything moves as it should in the clouds forever.
Nobody's paying less than they should.
Yeah,
it's just nothing.
No freeloaders, no people who,
In some ways, they're the lucky ones. The babies that we just threw into the volcano.
No, I agree, they are, because they get to live in a world where there is enough supply, finally.
One day.
Yeah.
One day. Today's episode of Seriously Wrong is brought to you by Unresolved Paradoxes in the Economics of Housing.
Paradox number 1. Rent control makes people less likely to move, which prevents the freeing up of cheaper units, but it's an inherent right of landlords to increase the rents of lower units when tenants move out to market rates.
Paradox number 2. Old, unrenovated units tend to have much cheaper rents than renovated units. But we can't have rent control because it stops landlords from renovating and updating older units.
Paradox number 3. The only way that we can create affordability is to reduce rents by increasing the supply of market housing. But if rents are reduced with rent control, that will stop the building of new supply because low rents can't support new developments.
Join us next time for even more paradoxes in housing economics.
Yeah, so we've talked about some of the paradoxes around these housing economics arguments. And I think a really key point is if a market can't function, if there is rent control, if there is vacancy control, if there is tenant protections, that means that under no circumstances can that market produce or maintain affordability. If rent control irrevocably damages the market where it can no longer produce housing, that means there's no scenario where supply can push housing into an affordable territory because those limitations will still exist.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it like this, the core of so many of the objections to rent control from the economics crowd amount to rent control will make the profits of developers, landlords, bankers, etc. decrease such that they will want to build less and they won't build enough homes for everybody. So that's kind of the problem, right? Like if rents are affordable, the market mechanisms, the profit incentive isn't going to be sufficient to motivate people to build homes for people. If having affordable rents means the incentive won't be there in this system, it kind of means it's a bad system for producing housing that people need.
When they talk about incentives of landlords and stuff, it always sends a shiver up my spine because like they're talking about people as if they're like these, it's like a natural force of the universe that investors are going to try to cut corners. And if there's rent control, it means they won't do maintenance. They'll have lower quality housing stock. But that's a universal incentive of for-profit housing. Every landlord, regardless of the rents they're allowed to charge, have an inherent economic incentive to try to shirk out on maintenance to make more money. That incentive is baked into the system with or without rent control. Another thing on this is this whole mythology that like the issue with housing is all this regulatory burden, all this red tape driving up costs. And it might be the case, I think it probably is the case, that there are examples of regulations that could be changed for the benefit of everyone, that there could be regulations that don't work as intended and so on, and that's fine. I'll have your back in that. Housing economics people just make the case for it. But overall, the regulatory burden in general is a minor aspect of the cost of construction compared to all these layers of unproductive investor profits. Land values are inflated by land banking, flipping, investment. Interest is profit for lenders that they either get by virtue of the wealth they can lend out or virtue of a legal regime that empowers banks to make profits on lending at a certain rate. Landlords who run properties have tenants pay off their construction and land costs, plus the interest to banks, plus taxes. plus property taxes, plus their own profit. And at the end, they own an asset, which is valued in millions, which then can be liquidated for profit. And they'll often treat mortgages as if they're a business expense. And the interest, I guess, is a business expense. But overall, paying off an asset, paying off your mortgage is like a savings account. They're taking the tenant's money and then using it to buy an asset. What happens is that once that asset is paid off, the actual month-over-month costs of running the building for things like property taxes, insurance, maintenance, it's a very minor fraction of what market rents can command. So that month-over-month profit goes into the pockets of the landlord in perpetuity. It's the labor of the tenants. And by virtue of their relative poverty to the landlord, they have to pay a huge fraction of their labor into the pockets of the landlord. But then to make things worse, what happens is often these buildings are refinanced. They're sold to another speculator, which restarts the cycle of the mortgage and interest payments, which increases the amount that needs to be commanded in rents in order to break even month over month. So effectively, the landlord, when they sell a sold off building, they're cashing out and they're getting paid in the future rent increases of tenants, because the new landlord is able to bid higher on a building if they know they're able to raise rents more in the future. So it's like this layered system of all these investor profit takers, all these unproductive layers, not people actually building the buildings, not actually designing the buildings and so on, not the actual people doing the maintenance. So there's this cycle of layers of investors making profit in different ways, and all that profit comes from the labor of the working class. Structurally, that is how the housing market works. So it's not something that's failing due to overregulation. It's working exactly as designed. It's designed to move the labor of the poor into the assets of the owning class and to allow laborers of profiteers and investors along the way to make a cut. And no amount of red tape cutting could ever fix that as a design flaw of a housing market.
Yeah, when they're saying that red tape is causing the market to fail, what they're saying is that red tape gets in the way of that process that you're describing, which is, like what it's designed to do. It's designed to, limit to some extent the amount that working people, that tenants can have their money squeezed from them by these unproductive people. But to the economics field, the way that you provide housing is through this system. It's the only way to do it, is these market incentives, is by ensuring that the incentives for all of these people along the chain, builders, developers, bankers the second time the building is sold, the new owners, everybody in the chain is constantly getting not just a return on their investment, but such a high return on their investment that they're going to choose this over other investment terms. So embedded within all of these critiques of rent control as something that interferes with the housing market working properly is the idea that this goal, that this system working in the way that we just described is the way that the housing market should work. It's the standard against which we are judging rent control policies. Like, how much do they interfere with that process? And it's like one of the things that is the most maddening about the economics profession and this like graph madness that they have is that their models have these underlying assumptions and underlying goals embedded within them. So it's a way to mask a political perspective as a science and make it sound like people who don't agree with that political perspective, who don't agree that this is the best system, that we should have homeless people and we should have people getting extremely rich off of rents forever in perpetuity. People who don't hold that political position are somehow anti-science, anti-the numbers, anti-reality.
And I feel bad because like people who aren't actually like beneficiaries of the system really believe it hook, line, and sinker sometimes, like all these kind of arguments that you see against, basically in favor of unleashing the market on housing, and with that comes opposition to rent control as one aspect of it. It's sad to me in the way that like they're not liars, but they're participating in lies. Because if the claim is that all of this opposition to rent control, deregulatory housing agenda, and so on, that the goal of it is to create general affordability for people, that when you pay your rent, it is a smaller fraction of your income, the housing economics profession and the development industry as such knows that is not possible. They know that that is not possible because it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that if $100 less of rent per month is the impact of rent control that stops the building of housing, that means that $100 less per month in rent as a result of oversupply will stop the production in housing. People understand that, who are deep in this stuff, who are in the industry and stuff, but you still run into and you talk to people who they're into it. And sometimes they know aspects of the stuff I don't and stuff. And I don't want to like shit on them because I feel bad for them. But people even say stuff like, well, this is how like you can end homelessness and stuff, which is just absurd and bizarre. Like if you look into how, for people who need deeply affordable housing, there's no amount of market supply that can create that scenario, but people believe it. And people believe things like, you know, that supply is going to create general affordability, but it can't. And what makes it a lie in certain corners is that there's people, if they know enough and you talk to them, well, they'll acknowledge that rents in general won't go down. It's that new asking rents will go down on average. So like when you rent a new apartment, instead of an additional amount of supply might make the asking rent $2,200 a month instead of $2,400 a month over a period of time and investment and so on. But that's only the new asking rents of new units. And what you have in that process is existing affordable units. If you don't have vacancy control, someone moves out and they jack up the rent to market rents or nearly market rents. And the impact of all of this is that if you think of what percentage of the housing in this city is a rate that people could afford based on census incomes. And it's like, okay, we're currently at 30%, and it's because of rent control. I'm thinking of like the Vancouver instance, 30%, and it's because of these rent stabilizations, the maximum allowable rent increases when you have an incumbent tenant. So all the supply in the world can't create the level of affordability that already exists from rent control. And like pro-supply advocates, if pressed, will admit that they're actually just affecting the new cost of rent, the new asking cost of rent, which will go down on average slightly through a lot of investment in supply. But that means that in general, without vacancy control, over time, the entire housing market is becoming more expensive year after year. And the best case scenario is that it will become more expensive more slowly across all housing instead of more expensive at whatever the regular rate is with these units being protected. But the thing is that the whole filtering argument, the idea that people move into more expensive apartments and better neighborhoods and they free up their old apartments, leaving these affordable units behind. If you don't have vacancy control, those rents are not affordable. They move to market rents or like 5% below market rents. So the only way that filtering could actually work is with strong rent controls. But they believe that strong rent controls are an affront to science. And there's layers to it. It's like, I think there's well-meaning people who are misled, and there's also people who know that they're lying. And it bugs me altogether, and I feel bad for the former category. And I'm angry at the latter category.
Another one of those obvious implications of their theory that never seems to get talked about. When we talk about supply and demand in terms of the housing market, or if we're talking about supply and demand in terms of market economics generally, the idea is that as you increase supply, costs will go down. So that will lower demand because more people will buy the item and the demand will be satiated. And, you know, these two lines meet at this perfect center point on the graph. But one of the basic ideas there is that like if costs on something are going up, demand is going to go down. So, you know, if Xboxes become more and more expensive, fewer people are going to want to buy Xboxes. And, you know, that's fine with Xboxes. If some people decide not to get one, it's not the end of the world for them. But housing doesn't work like that. They call this elasticity in demand. There's some things that are a completely inelastic demand, like food and medical needs, or like you need those every day and you need basically what you're going to need no matter what. And with housing, you can say maybe there's a little bit of elasticity, like some people will either choose roommates when they wouldn't have chosen roommates, or move back in at home, or live in their car for a while, or two people share a one bedroom and you just don't have a living room. people make those kinds of decisions. So there's a bit of elasticity, but at the end of the day, everybody needs a home. And no matter how much you increase the prices on homes, people are still going to need one. They can't just decide like the Xbox, oh, whatever. Fuck it. Who cares? So when you're talking about a supply and demand curve meeting in the middle at this perfect point where the prices, if they got any higher, the demand wouldn't be there anymore, and relies on the idea that there's a certain amount of demand that was removed because of the prices being high. That's part of the equilibrium. That's one of the factors of the equilibrium, is that the prices being where they are so high that it reduced demand somewhat to meet in the middle at this equilibrium point. So that reduced demand is people who need housing not getting housing. So baked into the very basis of like all of these arguments, the idea that there's a supply and demand graph, and if we increase supply, it'll make prices go down, is the idea that it's okay to distribute housing in such a way where some people are priced out of the market.
So yeah, on the subject of rent control, it's not just good, it's really great. It seems to be the best policy I've seen implemented around rental affordability. Like for people who are in rent-controlled units with all the variations therein, it's like they have a very significant increase in their quality of life. It's a great policy to protect existing rental affordability. So having stronger rent controls that you have yearly caps on increases that are tied to the units instead of the tenants, vacancy control, that is going to be for your dollar as a government or as a taxpayer is the best return on investment that you could possibly ask for in terms of the amount of affordability that's created. And often rent control critics, they'll say, oh, it has these short-term benefits to the tenants, but it has these long-term problems, blah, 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 which in my read is not actually true. But it's interesting they talk about the short-term, because really like the place that rent control really starts delivering affordability is over the long term, because rents on units where the construction and land costs are paid off being held into the future at maintained yearly stable rent increases instead of being massively jacked up.
Yeah, the benefits compound over time. It gets more affordable the longer you stay in an apartment.
Yeah, and with vacancy control, that affordability is given to anyone who happens to get a unit. And like the evidence shows that even in rent-controlled units, a large amount of people still choose to leave them.
Yeah. And I can hear too a theoretical objector saying, oh yeah, you're saying there's all these benefits for rent controlled units, but what if there's not enough rent controlled units? Or what about the other units? Or I totally agree. We can deal with that. We can put laws that slowly expand the number of units to which rent control applies to. And if you're saying, oh, then that will just cause no incentive for people to build buildings, we can say, that's fine. We can have federal investment in building units, federal, provincial, state, municipal, all kinds of investments in governments providing affordable housing for people.
Like in Canada, we have a universal healthcare system that is funded by taxation by the government. And a lot of these arguments that you see within the sphere of market housing, they're equally spurious in healthcare, but they also apply to healthcare. The idea that if we don't incentivize all the creation of all this great healthcare stuff by charging people a ton of money whenever they're sick, that it's going to disincentivize doctors and so on. But like you can structurally set up the system to have sufficient incentives for individual actors while having a collective program to meet basic needs. And governments can do things that are essential for people, like ensuring affordable housing exists at a loss funded by taxation, specifically taxes on the rich.
Yeah, we really need to introduce supply and demand back into medicine so that, when the price goes up, then the demand will go down and people will decide not to go to the doctor to check on things.
Yeah, they'll skip their medication. And,
maybe sometimes it's cancer, sometimes it's not. They skip their medication. They're making economic decisions and the price went up, so their demand went down. They're like, I no longer demand this medication at this price, so that's totally fine. So yeah, it doesn't work in medicine, doesn't work in housing.
Unless you want to transfer money from the poor to the rich, and that's your goal, then it works great.
Yeah. The only way to actually make sure that people have access to these services is to set society up to provide them to people. And, rent control is the most impactful thing that we can do right now, starting from where our feet are currently planted on the ground. We can't convert everything to social housing overnight. We can pass rent control, not overnight, but technically overnight, from when the vote is to when it goes into effect or whatever. It would be over some night in the future after you get it passed.
Yeah, a government with a political consensus and so on can put a bill in immediately, and it costs no money to the government. It just impairs the ability of private actors to make profit off of the incomes of the poor, and therefore the labor of the poor. And ideally, I want to see that as part of a wider spectrum of things like tenant displacement protections in the event of redevelopments, penalties for landlords who skip maintenance and other safety requirements. This isn't something we have to dangle carrots of the little incentive program. There needs to be a stick. This is essential. This is like putting lead in baby food, not doing maintenance on housing where people live and putting them in danger.
Yeah.
We also need programs for governments to invest in the creation of affordable housing and to purchase older apartments to be converted into publicly owned housing. We need a publicly owned housing program to ensure an end to homelessness and to ensure affordability for people of a variety of incomes. This is maybe a minor point, but I really want to hit this. So additional supply, quote unquote, like density, apartments, new buildings, it has benefits. Like, I'm not against apartments. I'm not even against condos. I think condos are an improvement over single family homes in a way, but treating supply programs as affordability programs is wrong, because new supply cannot create affordability by itself. But worse than that, anti-rent control programs are not even supply programs. Like, not having rent control doesn't create more supply, and getting rid of rent control when you have it also doesn't create more supply. So it fails on two levels. Like, getting rid of rent control doesn't make supply, but even if it did make supply, that supply would not create affordability, especially not affordability comparable to what rent control is delivering. So all this to say, I think critics of rent control are making pseudo-economic arguments, and similar pseudo-economic arguments are made about like abolishing the minimum wage and stuff. And the ultimate goal of them, intentional or not, is to make the poor subsidize the rich and create more mechanisms for the rich to become richer at the expense of the labor of the poor faster. And rent control is good, but it's insufficient to stop that process overall, but it's good to the degree that it does.
Yeah, it's just one policy. It only addresses one thing, but it does the job that it sets out to do. It controls the rents. And the amount that it controls the rents depends on how strong the legislation is. So what's the wise man once said? Increase the dose. It's about love, but this version's about rent control.
The man asked the doctor, what is the best medicine? And he said, love. And the man says, it's not working. And he smiled and said, increase the dose. This is a meme we've been sharing back and forth, me and you, for like 10 years.
What's the best medicine for keeping rents under control? Rent control. And what if it doesn't work? Increase the dose.
Yeah.
Thank everybody for listening.
Yeah. We'll see you soon. Thanks for listening. And yeah, rent control is good.
And if you want to help us pay our rents, you can head on over to our Patreon at patreon.com/seriouslywrong. This is a completely listener-supported show. The way that we fund ourselves and our lives and the show is through that Patreon. If you head over there, there's a ton of bonus episodes up there, and you can get our entire archive, all the bonus episodes for just $6 a month, access to our Discord server. There's a book club in the Discord server. And yeah, you can support the show, help us keep doing it.
Yeah, and we haven't been increasing that with inflation, unlike your landlord.
That's true.
There isn't a seriously wrong allowable increase. It's like we set it at 6.
Yeah, that's true.
We kept it at 6 for a long time.
It's been 6 the whole time.
First generation seriously wrong Patreon control.
Sweet, sweet 6. And unlike landlords, the value of what you're paying for has only gone up that whole time. It's not like you're still getting the same episodes you were getting 10 years ago. There's way, way more episodes now, and it's still only $6. You know, if it was an infomercial, we'd be saying how zany and wacky we are for keeping the price this low. But, you know, that's just the kind of guys we are. So
rent control is good. Oh, wow. Okay, I'm just going to turn that off. I hate having to do research for my Real Economics Tough Talk podcast by listening to these absolutely wild left-wing utopian maniacs. Hey, honey,
Yes, dear.
I just listened to a podcast made by some left-wing freaks. It was horrible.
That's nice, dear.
Hey, actually, sorry, can I talk to you about something for a second?
Sure. What is it? What's up?
I've been trying to think of the right time to say this, and I figure right now is as good as any. I feel like, you and I, since the marriage and everything, I'll just say it, we're not intimate as much as we used to be, and I was hoping that we could, try to schedule it in and increase our romantic, sexual intimacy a little more.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm really glad you brought this up. I've been noticing it. Obviously, it's happening. We're both noticing it. Let's talk about it. I guess what it is for me is, and I know I said that I was fine with it and that I even kind of like it. And, we've had a lot of fun with it, but it's just your kink, your fetish for the unintended consequences of well-meaning policies. It used to just be some of the time. Now it's all the time. And
yeah, I like it.
Unintended consequences are getting even less realistic.
Honey, I'm a housing economics guy. I've got a fetish for the unintended consequences of well-meaning progressive policies. It's just
I want some variety, something else. Can it not be an every time thing? Can we compromise?
Yeah, I mean, I'm down. It's okay. We can balance it out. It's not all about me. I mean, it's also about you. Just like a market transaction, right? I mean, I'm not trying to impose a kink control or something. I just, it's a mutually beneficial transaction, just like a landlord and a tenant. So, yeah.
That's so great to hear. Thank you. Yeah, I knew you'd be open-minded. I've been worried.
Of course.
And, well, okay, to be honest, I've been reading some erotica about a strong housing authority that keeps rents low for the people by force, and it forces landlords to, even in the face of that, they still have to do maintenance. They can't get around it by renovating. They closed all the loopholes. It's just a strong authority. What do you think about that? What if we threw some of that in there?
Oh, yeah, no, that could be cool. That could be fun. And then, I don't know, this is a little freaky, but maybe there's unintended impacts on landlord incentives or supply, so it's going down. Or
the thing I really like about these ones is that doesn't happen. There's it works. The strong housing authority is doing these things, and it works for the people, and everyone's just paying low rent and enjoying it.
Ooh, yeah.
There's literally zero unintended consequences. And every time I see that, when it says, and there were no unintended consequences, I'll be honest, the best climax I've had in years.
Yeah, so there must be huge waiting lists for those rent control departments, right? Ooh, yikes. I can work with this.
No, actually, there's so many empty units that you can move wherever you want at any time and pay the same rent the next day at the new place.
Yeah, that's... we can try it. We can try. Oh, doorbell. Okay, I'll be right back. We're going to finish this conversation. I promise. I'll be right back. Just a second. Hey, my co-host at the Real Economics Tough Talk podcast. What are you doing here? You on Real Economics Tough Talk business?
Oh, no, actually, I'm here today on landlord business.
Oh, yeah, because you're also my landlord.
Yeah, I am a landlord of many people, not just you. You're just one of my many tenants, but I am your one landlord. So about that, we got to do a mid-month rent raise this month, probably about 30%.
Okay.
Interest rates are going up. I'm going to be over-leveraged. I'm going to prorate it for the rest of the month, obviously. So, you're not paying extra rent for the days before today, just starting today and every day from this month on until I decide to raise it again. So if you can get that to me in the next 48 hours, the difference for the rest of the month, we won't have to initiate any eviction processes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, that's great, actually. I think restricting mid-month rent increases with no notice is kind of a form of rent control, which goes against nature. So I'm happy to pay that. I'm happy to get you that check in 48 hours so I don't get evicted. And however you want to raise it in the future, just let me know.
Yeah.
Because I'm a tenant and you're a landowner.
That's why we work so well together as co-hosts. And honestly, we work even better as landlord and rent boy. And you're a really good rent boy. You're one of my best.
Thank you. Well, I really believe it.
You're so grateful. You always say thank you. I could spit in your face and you would say thank you. Let's be honest.
Thank you for saying that.
I'm not going to, but I could.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sorry. I'm probably inflating your head so much by praising you like this. It's not good. for you. But the other thing, I did have some podcast business to talk about too. Have you heard that new Seriously Wrong rent control episode?
Oh, yeah. I was just listening to it. It's so horrible. I mean, numerous graphs were not mentioned, barely even accounted for.
Nature. Yeah,
it's an affront to nature. It really is.
They didn't account for graphs. They didn't account for nature. It's wildly irresponsible of them. It's causing ripples through the market. We need to do an emergency episode right now to respond to their episode. So don't say goodbye to your wife or kids. We got to leave.
Okay, yes, sir. Let's do it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Real Economics Tough Talk podcast. This week, we are talking about the misguided policies that progressives and leftists push for without recognizing their unintended consequences.
The theme of today's episode is how rent control goes against nature. So now, as we know, economic laws are found in nature. Now, obviously, when I say that, I'm not saying that there's literal graphs carved in the dirt, but what I'm saying is that the graphs come from the principles of logic or reason, and they're totally unconnected to any particular political ends. They're fundamental, objective, and natural. And that's what rent control is against.
You find you have these well-meaning people, these naives, and frankly, evil politicians who lead them. It's kind of like a Jurassic Park type thing, you know? They were so preoccupied that they don't ask themselves whether they should. Yeah, and people say, oh, golly, my rent, it's not so high. How wonderful. Well, it might seem wonderful to the untrained eye, but what's really happening is a total untethering of human from the natural world. You know, it's like rents aren't set by anyone. Like rents are an external thing that can be measured the way that you'd say measure the volume of a fluid when you apply different heats to it and so on.
Yeah, they're not set, they're discovered, and they can be distorted. But that distortion doesn't make the new rent real. It's a distortion of the true rent, the form of the rent that exists, the deeper truth.
You know, this is exactly what the leftists complain about, that, oh, we're damaging the ecology, blah, blah, blah. It's the same with rents. If you damage the ecology of rents, you create a disruptive sort of climate change of a lack of supply. And that's why I say these people are science deniers. It's like not believing in evolution. If you don't come to the conclusion that all rent control inherently causes rents to go up and causes all housing to become dilapidated and causes all homelessness to increase, it's exactly the same as someone who says that we live on a flat earth. It's sad. I feel bad for them.
Yeah, I think universal human empathy is so important, and we do have to feel bad for them. But at the same time, we can't downplay the damage that they cause, because they are wreaking havoc on our cities. They are causing high prices, homelessness. The question of what's to be done about it is a difficult one, a long one.
These ideas, they're so violent and destructive. They hide behind this false promise of how wonderful they are. It's dangerous. It's frankly dangerous to allow these ideas to go around unimpeded. I think we need to direct the police to crack down on these ideas, the same way we need to direct police to crack down on public displays of homelessness.
Let's keep our streets safe, not just from the riffraff that live out there, but from the riffraff of ideas in the idea space. You know, whether that means jailing proponents of these ideas or fining them or simply massively outfunding to speak over them in the media space. I don't know what it looks like, but something has to be done.
You know what? I'll just say it. I think we shouldn't rule out the death penalty for people who don't believe in market supply solutions. I mean, I think it'll be a great deterrent for one. You'll find these ideas might suddenly vaporize, but it also gives the investors a lot of market confidence. And I think we should sort of structure, you know, they're going to feel really good investing in housing, knowing that their ability to raise rents in the future will never be impeded by this sick ideology because it's threatened with the death penalty, which means they'll invest even more, which will make housing even more affordable over time. And I think at the very least we should consider it, because basically we have to structure society around investor confidence and incentives. And anytime investors or landlords tell us, that they're inconvenienced in some way, or they're not 100% confident and so on. We should find some new way to deregulate, some new way to give them money, some new way to jail or kill their opponents.
What you've just described is such a beautiful dream. It's like, I was just in awe listening to you. It's like, you're picturing everybody holding hands in a field with flowers, a meadow, there's the sun and birds and chirping, and there's even anthropomorphic animals in there as well holding hands.
No
it's
NIMBYs,
kind of like
no homeless.
Such a beautiful, beautiful dream. And it's why I've always said that I believe in putting forth a utopian dream, something to shoot for. That's like, sorry, I don't want to derail the episode with this too much, but I really believe it's possible. I think what you just described isn't just a utopian dream. It's something that we can achieve if we try.
Well, I've always thought that real economics tough talk is the real path to utopia. So I guess our closing note here for our special bonus emergency episode here is just that a better world is possible. Go out there and fight that good fight. Argue for the truth, argue for decency, argue for goodness, argue for affordability and an end to homelessness. And don't take the graph madness medication.
And if you see anybody listening to that recent episode of Seriously Wrong, throw red paint on them and pass them a link to us.
Thanks for listening, everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.